أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. I seek refuge from Satan in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. All praises to Allah. Peace and blessings on this Prophet Muhammad. Some of you might wonder why I took the other video. I made some mistakes in there when I checked it and I quoted something wrong, and I don't want to be like other people are, who quote things out of context or from wrong sources. When I checked it again, I realized I made a mistake, so I took it off. Anyway, I'll just redo the video, and basically what we're talking about was the second video in the series of Islam Answers Back, and we were talking about the idea of what is truth. How can a sincere seeker of truth or seeker of knowledge learn about the true way of life, the message of God? There's so many stumbling blocks, especially in the quest for someone to learn about Islam. And today, with the whole agenda of the West, of labeling Muslims as terrorists, and this has happened, as I said in my other video, from a long time ago, back to the Crusades. At that time, there was already some kind of propaganda against Muslims, and even today, and 200 years ago, and 100 years ago, with the Orientalists always being breathing down the neck of the Muslims, with the colonization and so on. So these are things we have to keep in mind when someone wants to study Islam, that he will encounter a lot of attacks on Islam, and in the end, I would say that it really boils down to sincerity. For someone to move across and cross these paths and these stumbling blocks, I would say he really has to be, or she really has to be, sincere, and also has to put the emotions on hang for a second or for a few minutes, and really use the rational faculty of their mind. The question that arises now is, what is the truth? How can we know the truth? What's the criteria for the truth? We live in the West, a lot of us, and I've got a lot of emails and requests from people and questions, and a lot of them seem to be very emotional, even from Muslims, even from new Muslims. They tend to have problems with some of the things that Islam has been recorded to have done in history, and I try to explain to them, really, to make this distinction between Muslims and Islam. Another thing that's a stumbling block, of course, some of the issues that Islam dictates, the kind of practices, right? So a lot of people using a frame of mind of the West, right? And now I'm talking about frame of mind of West. You're talking here about ethics that allow, drinking, that allow adultery, fornication, which are encouraged in some parts of the West society, drugs, intoxication, interest, preying on, poor people. This is some of the ethics and morals. I'm not saying, this is the basis of the society, but some of these ethics and morals are embedded in the society of the West. So coming from that kind of mentality, and looking at at some of the things that Islam orders, right? A lot of people have a problem with it. It threatens their lifestyle and so on and so forth. So they stop moving on and learning more about Islam, which I think is a very big mistake, due to the fact that you will not reach an understanding of what is truth, basing your your search on emotions or on what you've been conditioned to believe in the 21st century. You really have to step out of the box and really look at every instant and every event from a very objective point of view, if you're looking for a truth, that is. And that is, again, boils down, I'll repeat again, to sincerity. And we talked last time about some of the fallacies that are used by Orientalists and people who are attacking Islam. And I have to tell you, there's a lot of attacks out there on the internet, and I've studied a lot of them. And I really feel bad. I'm sure a lot of new Muslims and a lot of Muslims who have had to go through this. It's not easy. You really have to, you're fighting with your emotions. You're fighting what you're taught here in the West. You're fighting with the two cultures, East and West, are fighting amongst each other within yourself, right? Your two upbringings. Let's say your parents were coming from a different country and they taught you something, and you grew up in United States, for example. There's a clash there. So it's not an easy fight, really. Some of the greatest battles that have ever been fought, from one quote, are within the quiet chambers of our own hearts. So, but for the seeker of truth, he moves on. He passes these blocks. He steps out of the box and seeks the truth ultimately. He uses his rationale and looks at each event on its own, very objectively, as you said. So, a very oft occurring, I would say, technique that people use against Islam is the appeal to emotion, the appeal to ridicule, as we said, right? They try to make fun of Islam. They try to appeal to the people's understanding of, for example, marriage, and try to put something, show that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or that the Muslims are doing something else, and that the acceptable norm is only what the West is teaching, and this is the best, and we are the best, and we know the best, and no one else knows better. And whoever goes against the Western norm of marriage, for example, of monogamy, right? Then they're wrong, and the person who has propagated this view is not a prophet, and he's just a pervert and a sexual, predator. You have to keep in mind, whenever you hear such labels as pervert, sexual predator, pedophile, and killer and warlord, you really have to analyze this and look whether this is a constant trend, whether there's no such behaviors within other people, who are actually calling, who are actually making these accusations, and whether these behaviors are actually true, and these labels can actually be attributed to that person, right? So, for example, the issue with Aisha, right? Was Prophet Muhammad a pedophile? A lot of people right away, bluntly say, "Oh, he was a pedophile." Pedophilia is when a person is actually has a psychological disorder that he's very attracted to very young, whether it's a male or a female, and that's a constant trend, right? That person's always going back to that, right? Like some of the pedophiles, right? They always go back to the playfields, even though they're put in jail. They come back and they attack kids and they rape them, right? So did Prophet Muhammad do that? Certainly not. His marriage to Aisha is a very special thing. If you look and study it, it was a marriage based on love. It was an acceptable norm of society. No one ever complained at that time. It's only when the Western understanding has started kicking in, that people had a problem with it. Even within the Western concept in these countries back in the days, people were married very, very young. So these are just some of the the techniques that people use, and I'm just going to try to explain to our viewers a lot of these issues in our videos. Another very common thing is the issue of war and violence, right? People will say the Prophet Muhammad was a warlord and he was violent, and it's funny, the same people, their own country, and they themselves are supporting countries who are going and killing people day and night. And we're not talking about under 1,000 people which died during the reign of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, during the 23 years, but we're talking here about in the millions now, dying from the so-called peaceful campaign that is being launched by the West in the Middle East, their peaceful agenda of globalization and of pushing on people capitalism and democracy. So it's very, I would say, hypocritical from people to do that and to look at Prophet Muhammad's 23 years, that 1,000 people died in war, and within the concept of propagating the truth and standing for what is right and standing against oppression. And we'll talk about the other things. A lot of people raise objections here that some poets were killed and some singers and so on, and we'll talk about that, exactly why that happened, again from a very objective point of view, from a very rational point of view. But going back to the war issue, right? The same people who accuse the Muslims of all being warlike and fighting are the same people who I said they themselves are supporting war, and their money's going for war, and they might even be like, for example, the Orientalists and the propagators of Christianity, who went to India and to all the other places during colonization, right? These are supporting a warlike campaign. Okay, so we have to be careful with how we look at things, what kind of accusations we bring forth in a discussion, because a lot of these can be shattered very easily using just rationale and looking objectively at things. And that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to look at comparisons between the prophets. We're going to try to keep a very steady trend between the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran, and other things throughout history for those who don't believe in books. And I leave it at that. For next time we'll discuss, we'll start with the first issue. Assalamu alaikum.